The woman fell like a wounded bird against his porch rail, her knees buckling just as thunder cracked across the Montana sky. Samuel Thorne had been whittling by lamplight when he heard the stumble, the soft gasp, then silence. He set down his knife and stepped into the rain. She lay crumpled against the weathered wood, her dark hair plastered to pale skin, dress torn and muddy. Samuel knelt beside her, rain soaking through his shirt, and gently turned her face toward the flickering light spilling from his doorway. His breath caught in his throat. The eyes that stared back at him, unconscious but unmistakable, belonged to his wife. Catherine's eyes. The same amber green that had watched him leave for the war 5 years ago. The same eyes he'd closed forever when fever took her, the winter he came home. "Jesus," he whispered, his hands trembling as he lifted the stranger's limp form. Inside, he laid her on Catherine's old quilt, the one with tiny blue flowers that still smelled faintly of lavender soap. The woman's breathing was shallow but steady, her pulse weak beneath skin, cold as creek water. A nasty gash ran along her temple, dried blood marking where something or someone had struck her hard. Samuel stoked the fire and set water to boil, his movements mechanical while his mind reeled. It wasn't just the eyes, the curve of her jaw, the delicate arch of her brows, even the way her lips parted slightly in unconsciousness. Everything echoed Catherine with haunting precision. He'd buried his wife 3 winters ago, beneath the old oak behind his cabin. He'd carved her name into granite with his own hands, had spoken words over her grave that nearly killed him to say. Yet here lay a woman who could be Catherine's twin, breathing softly in the bed they'd once shared. Rain hammered the roof like rifle shots. Samuel poured whiskey into his coffee and watched the stranger sleep, noting how firelight played across features that belonged in his dreams or his nightmares. Outside, lightning split the darkness, and for one terrible moment, he wondered if the fever dreams had finally claimed his sanity. But the woman's chest rose and fell with real breath, and blood had stained his hands when he carried her inside. When she stirred near midnight, her eyelids fluttering like moth wings, Samuel held his breath and waited to see if ghosts could speak. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharp with fear as they found his face in the firelight. She tried to sit up, wincing at the movement, one hand flying to the wound on her temple. "Easy," Samuel said, setting down his cup. "You're safe." She studied him with those impossible amber-green eyes, taking in the rough-hewn cabin, the fire crackling in the stone hearth, his weathered hands folded carefully in his lap. When she spoke, even her voice carried an echo of Catherine's musical cadence. "Where am I?" "My cabin, 20 miles north of Clearwater. You collapsed on my porch." He paused, struggling with words that felt like walking on broken glass. "What's your name?" "Sarah." She touched the gash again, her fingers coming away clean. "Sarah Whitmore. I was trying to reach town when my horse threw me. There were men chasing." Her eyes widened with sudden memory. "Are they gone?" Samuel nodded toward the shuttered windows. "Been quiet all night. Storm likely scattered whatever tracks you left." He leaned forward, studying her face in the dancing light. "Who were they, these men?" Sarah's jaw tightened, and for a moment she looked exactly like Catherine had when defending some wounded animal she'd found in the woods. "Bounty hunters. They think I killed my husband in Colorado Territory." The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. He'd known Catherine was dead, had felt her final breath against his cheek, yet seeing her face on this stranger, hearing her voice speak of violence and flight, made his chest ache with confused grief. "Did you?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. "No." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "But I won't hang for something I didn't do." Samuel stood abruptly, moving to the window. Outside, dawn was still hours away, but the storm had gentled to steady rain. If bounty hunters were tracking her, they'd pick up the trail once the weather cleared. His nearest neighbor was 15 miles south, too far to reach before daylight exposed them both. "You can't stay," he said, not turning around. "If they come here, I'll go." Sarah struggled to sit up again, determination masking obvious pain. "I won't bring trouble to your door." But when Samuel looked back at her, all he saw was Catherine trying to be brave when the fever was winning, promising she'd be fine while death settled in her eyes. He'd failed his wife when she needed him most, been away fighting someone else's war, while she faced her final battle alone. Now here sat a woman wearing Catherine's face, running from men who wanted to see her hang. Outside, the rain began to ease, and somewhere in the distance, Samuel thought he heard hoofbeats. The sound came again at first light. Not hoofbeats, but something worse. Voices, low and deliberate, filtering through the thinning rain like smoke under a door. Samuel counted at least 3 men, maybe 4, their words too distant to make out, but their intent clear in the careful way they moved. Sarah had dozed fitfully through the pre-dawn hours, her fever breaking just before sunrise. Now she sat rigid on the edge of the bed, listening to the approaching sounds with the stillness of hunted prey. "Back room," Samuel whispered, already moving. "There's a root cellar behind the flour barrel. Get down there and don't make a sound." "What about you?" "I'll handle this." But as Sarah disappeared into the shadows, Samuel felt his hands shake as he reached for his rifle. The men outside had spread out. He could hear them positioning themselves around the cabin with military precision. These weren't ordinary bounty hunters. They were professionals. A boot scraped against his porch steps. Then silence, heavy as a held breath. The knock, when it came, was polite, almost apologetic. "Morning," called a voice smooth as creek stones. "Marshal Davies, Colorado Territory, looking for a woman, dangerous woman." Samuel opened the door slowly, keeping his rifle visible but not raised. 3 men stood in his yard, their dusters dark with rain, badges glinting on their vests. The speaker was tall and lean, with pale eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of Samuel's face. "Marshal," Samuel nodded. "Bit early for visiting. Desperate times." Davies smiled without warmth. "Woman we're tracking killed her husband 3 nights ago. Cut his throat while he slept. Trail leads this direction. Haven't seen anyone. Mind if we look around? Storm like last night. A person could get turned around pretty easy. Might have sought shelter without you knowing." It wasn't a request. The other 2 men had already started moving, one toward the barn, another circling toward the back of the cabin. Samuel felt sweat prick his spine despite the cool morning air. "Course not," he said. "Though I should mention, I'm a light sleeper. Anyone came calling, I'd have heard them." Davies stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wooden porch. "Funny thing about this woman, real pretty they say. Amber eyes, dark hair, type that might make a man forget his civic duty." The words hit like bullets. Samuel kept his expression neutral, but Davies was watching him with the patience of a snake in tall grass. "That's so, indeed." Davies glanced toward the cabin's interior, noting the rumpled quilt, the second cup by the fire. "Rewards substantial, friend, $500. That's a year's wages for most folks." Behind the cabin, one of the men called out. They'd found something, fresh tracks leading to the porch, maybe, or signs of Sarah's collapse. Samuel's grip tightened on his rifle as Davies' smile widened. "Now then," the marshal said, his hand moving to rest on his pistol grip. "Why don't we have that look around? Search if you want," Samuel said, stepping aside. "But I've got coffee on. Seems only neighborly to offer." Davies studied him for a long moment, then nodded to his men. They moved through the cabin like wolves, overturning blankets, checking behind the stove, opening every door and cabinet, while Samuel poured 3 cups of coffee with steady hands. The marshal lingered by the mantel, examining the daguerreotype that sat there. Samuel and Catherine on their wedding day, her amber eyes bright with happiness. "Pretty wife," Davies observed. "She around?" "Died 3 years back. Fever." "Sorry to hear it." But Davies didn't sound sorry. He sounded calculating. "Must get lonely out here. Man might welcome some company." One of the deputies called from the back room. "Marshal, found something." Samuel's blood turned to ice water, but Davies just smiled and walked toward the sound. Through the open doorway, Samuel could see the deputy kneeling beside the displaced flour barrel, examining scratches in the wooden floor where Sarah had squeezed into the root cellar. "Recent marks," the deputy said. "Someone's been moving this barrel." Davies nodded slowly. "Well now, that is interesting." Samuel knew it was over. In minutes, maybe seconds, they'd discover Sarah's hiding place. The marshal would collect his bounty, and Sarah would hang for a crime she claimed she didn't commit. Just like Catherine had died while he was away, another woman he'd failed to protect. But as Davies reached for his pistol, Samuel made a choice that surprised them both. "She's here," he said quietly. The marshal's hand froze. His deputies turned, weapons half drawn, but she didn't kill anyone. Samuel set down his coffee cup, his movements deliberate and calm. "I know because I know her. That's my wife down there, Marshal, Catherine Thorne." Davies laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your wife's been dead 3 years. You just told me yourself. Look at the picture again." Samuel nodded toward the mantel. "Really look." The marshal's eyes flicked between the daguerreotype and Samuel's face, and for the first time since arriving, uncertainty crept into his expression. The resemblance was impossible to deny. The bone structure, the eyes, even the delicate way both women held their chins. "People got twins," Davies said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Not like that. Not exact like that." Samuel stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Some things in this world can't be explained, Marshal. Some people get second chances they never expected." From below, they heard a soft scraping sound, Sarah moving in the cramped space, probably trying to find a more comfortable position. Davies' hand moved back toward his gun. "Even if that's true," the marshal said, "there's still a dead man in Colorado. Someone's got to pay." The moment balanced on a knife's edge, 3 armed men against 1, truth and lies twisted together like smoke in wind. Samuel walked to the back room and knelt beside the barrel. "Catherine," he called softly, "come up, darling. It's time." Sarah emerged slowly, her hair dusty, confusion clear in those amber-green eyes. But she didn't speak, just looked between Samuel and the marshal, with the trust of someone who'd decided her fate was no longer in her hands. Davies stared at her face, then at the daguerreotype, then back again. His deputies shifted nervously, hands still on their weapons, but uncertainty growing with each passing second. "Identical," one of them whispered. "Jesus, Marshal, they're identical." "Impossible," Davies said, but his voice cracked on the word. Samuel moved to stand beside Sarah, and she leaned into him slightly, a gesture so natural, so perfectly like Catherine, that his breath caught. "Tell them what really happened," he said gently. Sarah looked up at him, those impossible eyes shining with unshed tears. "James, my husband, he drank. When he drank, he hit. That night he came home worse than usual. I ran to the neighbors, asked them to send for the sheriff. When we came back," her voice broke, "he'd cut his own throat with his razor. Neighbors saw it, but the county judge, he was James's brother, said I'd driven my husband to it, called it murder, same as if I'd held the blade." Davies was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, he holstered his pistol. "You got witnesses to back that story. 3 families, all willing to testify if it comes to court." The marshal looked between Samuel and Sarah one more time, shaking his head like a man trying to wake from a strange dream. "This is the damnedest thing I ever saw." He gestured to his men. "Pack it up. We're heading back to Colorado territory. Gonna have some questions for that judge." As the bounty hunters rode away, Samuel and Sarah stood in the doorway, watching until they disappeared into the morning mist. The silence that followed felt different from the tense quiet that had preceded dawn, peaceful now, full of possibility instead of threat. "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why did you help me?" Samuel turned to study her face in the growing daylight. The resemblance to Catherine was still there, still startling, but he was beginning to see the differences too. The slight scar above her left eyebrow, the way she held her shoulders a fraction higher, the subtle variations that made her Sarah instead of a ghost. "Because some chances don't come twice," he said.
And I missed the first one. Years later, travelers passing through clear water would tell stories about the strange couple who lived in the cabin north of town, how the woman looked exactly like the wife in the faded daguerreotype on their mantel, how their love seemed to exist outside of ordinary time. Some said it was coincidence, others whispered about miracles, about second chances that defied explanation. Samuel never told them the truth, that love isn't about getting back what you've lost, but about being brave enough to recognize it when it finds you again, wearing a different face, carrying different scars, offering a different kind of forever. The old daguerreotype still sat on the mantel, but beside it now stood another, Samuel and Sarah on their wedding day, her amber-green eyes bright with their own unique light, looking toward a future built on choice rather than memory. Outside their window, the Montana sky stretched endlessly blue, full of promise.
Our Wild West journey isn't stet ending. It's stet's just beginning. Click on the screen or check the pinned comment to join my new channel. Saddle up for the next adventure.